Some say destiny doesn't knock. It crashes through your door when you least expect it, wearing the face of a stranger and carrying the weight of tomorrow. Before we begin this emotional journey, please subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments, which country and city are you watching from? I love to see our community growing around the world. The wind cut through Maya like 1,000 frozen knives. She couldn't feel her feet anymore. Each step was a guess, a prayer that the ground would be there when her boot came down. The highway had disappeared beneath the snow hours ago, leaving only a vague depression between the white drifts, a path that might lead somewhere or might lead nowhere at all. One more step. Just one more. Her hands clutched her swollen belly through the thin spring jacket that had seemed perfectly adequate back in Denver, back when she'd had a warm apartment and a life that made sense. The baby kicked weakly against her ribs and terror shot through her like lightning. Please, not my baby. Please. The blizzard swallowed her voice before it could even form. Snow pelted her face, stinging like angry wasps. She couldn't see more than 3 feet ahead. Couldn't remember the last time she'd seen headlights or a house, or any sign that human beings still existed in this frozen hell. Her car had died 6 miles back, maybe more. The engine had coughed, shuddered, and gone silent, leaving her stranded on this forgotten mountain road in Colorado. She'd waited for help until the cold had crept through the broken heater, until her breath had started fogging the windows with ice, until she'd realized that no one was coming. No one even knew she was here. Derek's voice echoed in her memory, cold and final. Get out, Maya. We're done here. 3 weeks ago, she'd been standing in the marble foyer of his downtown penthouse, one hand protective over her belly, watching the man she loved transform into a stranger. His parents had stood behind him like sentinels, his mother's diamond earrings catching the light as she'd looked at Maya with pure disgust. Did you really think our son would ruin his future for some waitress and her bastard? The woman had sneered. Derek hadn't even looked at her. The man who'd whispered promises in the dark, who'd cried when they'd first heard the heartbeat. He'd simply stood there, silent and cold, while security escorted her out with nothing but her purse and the clothes on her back. 3 weeks of couch surfing. 3 weeks of friends growing tired of her, of polite excuses and uncomfortable silences. 3 weeks of her bank account draining while her belly grew and employers looked at her with sympathetic smiles that meant no. Yesterday, her last friend had asked her to leave. Something about her new boyfriend not being comfortable with the situation. So Maya had gotten in her dying Honda and just driven. Away from the city that had chewed her up and spit her out. Away from everyone who'd decided she wasn't worth the trouble. She'd made it 40 miles before the car had given up, just like everyone else. A gust of wind slammed into her and she fell to her knees in the snow. The cold bit through her jeans instantly, vicious and sharp. She knelt there, gasping, her frozen lungs burning with each breath. Get up or you'll die here. But her legs wouldn't obey. The exhaustion was too heavy, the cold too deep. She could just lie down just for a moment. Just close her eyes. The baby kicked again. Harder. Insistent. Maya didn't know where the strength came from, but she forced herself to her feet. Stood swaying like a broken tree in the wind. And then she saw it. A light. Faint and golden, barely visible through the curtain of white. So distant it might have been a hallucination. But it was there. She stumbled toward it, fell, got up, stumbled again. A fence appeared out of nowhere, rough wooden post she grabbed onto, used to pull herself forward. The dark shape of a barn loomed ahead, and beyond it, the source of that precious light. The barn door wasn't locked. She nearly wept as she pulled it open and stumbled inside. The wind died instantly. The air was cold but still, a mercy after hours of being battered and torn. The smell of hay and horses wrapped around her like a blanket. She could hear animals shifting in their stalls, feel the faint warmth of their bodies. Maya made it 3 steps before her legs gave out. She collapsed into a pile of hay near the door, curled around her belly and finally let the tears come. We made it. We're safe. She was already drifting into unconsciousness when the dog started barking, sharp, aggressive sounds that cut through the quiet. Then footsteps, heavy and deliberate, crunching through snow outside. The barn door flew open. A man's silhouette filled the doorway, backlit by lantern light. She could make out broad shoulders, the hard line of a rifle barrel, a face shadowed and severe. The lantern swung toward her, and the light caught her curled form in the hay, a pregnant woman, half frozen, barely conscious. The man went absolutely still. Then, in a voice rough as gravel and used to gentleness, Jesus Christ. The rifle lowered. And Maya's world went dark. Elias had seen a lot of things in 43 years, war, loss, the worst that men could do to each other, but he'd never seen anything like this. A woman. Pregnant. Half frozen in his barn like some abandoned animal. For a moment, he just stood there, rifle hanging loose in his hand, the lantern casting wild shadows across the hay. His first instinct had been anger, someone trespassing, stealing, causing trouble he didn't need. But anger died the second the light caught her face. She was young. Mid-20s maybe. Her lips had gone blue, her skin pale as fresh snow. Ice crystals clung to her dark hair. And her belly, Christ, she was ready to pop any day now. Ma'am? His voice came out rougher than he intended. Years of not using it much did that. Ma'am, can you hear me? Nothing. She didn't move, didn't respond. Just lay there curled around that swollen belly like she was trying to protect it even in unconsciousness. He swore under his breath and set the rifle against the barn wall. Knelt down beside her and pressed 2 fingers to her throat. Her pulse was there, weak and fluttering, but there. Her skin was ice. Hypothermia. Maybe worse. Elias didn't let himself think. Thinking led to questions, and questions led to hesitation, and hesitation could kill her. He slid one arm under her knees, the other behind her shoulders, and lifted. She was heavier than she looked, not fat, just carrying the weight of another life. He adjusted his grip and turned toward the door, pushing it open with his shoulder. The blizzard hit him like a wall. The 50 yards between the barn and the house might as well have been a mile. Wind tore at him from every direction, trying to rip her from his arms. Snow pelted his face, blinding him. He bent over her, using his body as a shield, and pushed forward. 1 step. Then another. His boots sank deep with each step. The woman's head lolled against his chest, and he could feel how cold she was even through his heavy coat. Too cold. Dangerously cold. The porch steps were treacherous with ice. He almost slipped, caught himself, kept moving. The front door, thank God he'd left it unlocked, swung open under his boot, and then they were inside. The house swallowed them in darkness and silence. Elias kicked the door shut, cutting off the howling wind. His breath came hard and fast, fogging in the cold air. The house wasn't much warmer than outside. He only heated the rooms he used, and he didn't use many. He carried her down the dark hallway to the guest room. The bed was made. His wife had made it years ago before everything fell apart. He never changed the sheets. Never saw the point. He laid the woman down as gently as he could and stepped back, running a hand over his scarred jaw. His fingers caught on the rough tissue that ran from his left eye to his chin, a souvenir from Afghanistan that had never quite healed right. Focus. The fireplace. He moved to it, his hands working on autopilot. Kindling logs, newspaper from 3 years ago. The match hissed to life and flames caught. The fire spread slowly, reluctantly, but it spread. He pulled quilts from the cedar chest, old heavy things his grandmother had made. Piled them on top of the woman until she was buried beneath them. Her coat was soaked through, but he didn't dare undress her. Not appropriate. Not his place. Instead, he went to the kitchen and put the kettle on the ancient gas stove. Made tea, strong and sweet the way his mother used to make it. The kind that could wake the dead. When he came back, she was stirring. Maya's eyes opened to firelight and terror. A man loomed over her, massive, broad-shouldered, his face half hidden in shadow. What she could see made her heart slam against her ribs. Scars. Deep ones running down the left side of his face. Dark eyes that looked like they'd forgotten how to be kind. Rough hands that could probably break her in half. She scrambled backward instinctively, a cry catching in her throat, but her body wouldn't cooperate. She was too weak, too cold, wrapped in too many heavy blankets. Easy. The man's voice was low, gravelly. He didn't move closer. Just stood there holding a steaming mug, watching her like she was a spooked horse. You're safe. Safe. The words sounded foreign coming from that scarred mouth. Where? Her voice cracked. Her throat felt like sandpaper. Where am I? My house. Found you in my barn. He moved slowly, deliberately, and set the mug on the bedside table. You were half frozen. Lucky I heard the dogs. Maya's hand went to her belly automatically. The baby kicked, and relief flooded through her so intense she almost sobbed. Your baby's fine. The man said it like he could read her mind. But you need to warm up. Drink this. He stepped back, putting distance between them. Crossed his arms over his chest and leaned against the wall, waiting. Maya looked at the mug, tea from the smell of it, then back at the man. He didn't look friendly. Didn't look welcoming. But he'd brought her inside. Started a fire. Made her tea. Who are you? She whispered. The ghost of something, maybe amusement, maybe pain, flickered across his scarred face. Name's Elias. He paused. And you're trespassing on my ranch. The storm didn't let up. If anything, it got worse. By morning, if you could call the dim gray light seeping through the windows morning, the snow had drifted halfway up the first floor windows. Elias checked the radio in the kitchen and got nothing but static and occasional crackling reports about impassable roads, down power lines, emergency shelters in town. Town was 30 miles away. Might as well have been on the moon. Roads won't be clear for at least 2 days, he said, not looking at her. You're stuck here. Maya sat at the kitchen table, wrapped in one of the quilts, her hands curled around a mug of coffee. She'd slept 15 hours straight and woken up sore, stiff, but alive. The baby was active this morning, doing somersaults that made her wince and smile at the same time. I'm sorry, she said quietly. For the trouble. Elias grunted something that might have been acknowledgement and turned back to the stove, where he was frying eggs in an ancient cast-iron skillet. The kitchen was a mess, Dishes piled in the sink, newspapers stacked on the counter, dust thick on the windowsills. This was a house where a man lived alone and saw no point in pretending otherwise. "You eat eggs?" he asked. "Yes, thank you." He slid two onto a chipped plate and set it in front of her without ceremony. Then he took his own plate and sat at the opposite end of the table, as far from her as the space allowed. They ate in silence. Maya could feel him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, quick, assessing glances that made her feel like a puzzle he couldn't quite figure out. She kept her eyes on her plate and tried not to think about how strange this was, how vulnerable she was, alone in the middle of nowhere with a scarred stranger who looked like he could crush her with one hand. But he'd saved her. That had to count for something. By afternoon, Maya couldn't stand sitting still anymore. Her body still ached, and the baby made every movement awkward, but she needed to do something. Needed to feel useful instead of like a burden that had crashed into this man's solitary life. She started with the dishes. Elias was outside doing something with the animals, and the kitchen was a disaster. She rolled up her sleeves and tackled the sink, washing each plate and mug with care, setting them to dry on a towel she found in a drawer. Then she wiped down the counters, organized the newspapers into a neat stack, swept the floor. The house was enormous, she could see that now in the daylight. High ceilings, wide hallways, beautiful crown molding that had been expensive once. But it felt empty, abandoned, like a museum of a life that used to be. She found a laundry basket in the hallway, full of clean clothes that had never been folded. She carried it to the living room where the fire still burned low and settled onto the couch. As she folded, methodical, soothing work, she started humming without thinking about it. An old song her mother used to sing. Something about sunshine and better days. She didn't hear Elias come back inside. He stood in the doorway, snow still dusting his shoulders, and just stared. The house smelled different. Coffee and something else. Lemon soap, maybe, from the dishes. And there was sound. Humming. Soft and feminine and so out of place in this tomb he'd been living in that it made his chest tight. The woman, Maya, she told him her name was Maya, sat on his couch folding his shirts with small, careful hands, her belly resting in her lap, humming like this was normal. Like she belonged here. Something twisted in his gut. Something he'd buried so deep he'd thought it was dead. He turned and walked away before she could see him. The temperature dropped as evening approached. Maya stood by the living room window, watching the snow fall in thick curtains, and shivered despite the fire. The old house was full of drafts, air leaking through gaps around the windows, under the doors, through cracks in the walls. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to conserve warmth, when she heard heavy footsteps behind her. Elias crossed the room without a word and opened the hall closet. Maya watched as he reached up to the top shelf and pulled down a coat, thick wool, deep forest green, lined with quilted satin. It looked expensive. Well made. A woman's coat. He held it out to her, not meeting her eyes. "Put this on," he said gruffly. "I don't need you getting sick again." Maya hesitated. The coat looked like it had belonged to someone. Someone important. "Are you sure?" "I don't want to. It's just sitting there collecting dust." His voice was rough, impatient. "Take it." She took it carefully, reverently, and slipped her arms into the sleeves. It was too big in the shoulders but perfect otherwise, and it was the warmest thing she'd felt since before her car died. The fabric still held a faint scent, lavender maybe, or roses. "Thank you," she whispered. Elias grunted and turned away, but not before she saw something flicker across his scarred face. "Pain maybe. Or memory." "There's stew on the stove," he said, already walking toward the kitchen. "Help yourself." Maya pulled the coat tighter around herself and her baby, and for the first time in 3 weeks, maybe longer, she felt something that wasn't fear or desperation. She felt safe. It was a dangerous feeling. Safety made you hope, and hope could break you worse than anything else. But standing in this drafty old house, wrapped in a dead woman's coat, with a gruff stranger who'd saved her life cooking stew in the next room, Maya let herself hope anyway. Just a little. Outside, the storm howled on. The fire crackled and popped, sending shadows dancing across the walls. Outside, the wind howled like something alive and angry, rattling the window panes, but inside the living room it was warm. Almost peaceful. Maya sat curled in the armchair closest to the fire, the green wool coat still wrapped around her shoulders. Elias occupied the couch across from her, his long legs stretched out, a mug of coffee going cold in his hands. They'd eaten the stew in silence, cleaned up in silence, and now they sat in silence. But it was a different kind of silence than before. Less hostile. More waiting. "Can I ask you something?" Maya's voice was soft, hesitant. Elias looked up. In the firelight, his scars seemed less harsh. Almost distinguished. "You can ask. Why do you live out here all alone?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he set his mug down on the side table and leaned back, his eyes fixed on the flames. "Had a family once," he said finally. "Wife. Daughter." She was 4. His jaw worked, muscles tensing. "Car accident. Black ice on the highway. I was deployed, Afghanistan. Got the call from the base chaplain. Maya's hand went to her mouth. Elias, I'm so... Don't. The word came out sharp. He closed his eyes, breathed. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. That was 7 years ago. Came back here after my discharge. Been here ever since. He gestured vaguely at the house. Seemed easier to just stop. Stop trying. Stop pretending the world made sense. The fire crackled in the silence that followed. I'm sorry, Maya whispered, for bringing all this into your life. Your peace. Elias looked at her, then really looked at her. Your turn. Why were you walking through a blizzard 8 months pregnant? Maya's hand went to her belly automatically, protective. She'd known this question was coming, but that didn't make it easier to answer. His name was Derek, she began. We met at the restaurant where I worked. He was charming, successful, everything I thought I wanted. She laughed bitterly. When I got pregnant, he seemed happy at first. Said all the right things. But then I met his parents. Her voice hardened. They looked at me like I was dirt. His mother said I was trying to trap him, that I was just some gold-digging waitress. And Derek. She swallowed hard. He didn't defend me. Didn't say a word. Just stood there while they called my baby a mistake. Bastard, Elias muttered. He wanted me to get rid of it. Said it would complicate things. When I refused, he kicked me out. Changed the locks. Had his lawyers threaten anyone who helped me. She wiped at her eyes angrily. 3 weeks ago I had an apartment, a job, friends. Now I have nothing. Just this baby and whatever kindness strangers are willing to. The baby kicked. Art. Maya gasped, her hand flying to her side. The movement was so forceful it was visible through the coat, a distinct ripple across her belly. Elias was on his feet instantly. What's wrong? It's okay, it's just... She winced as another strong kick landed against her ribs. Someone's feeling active tonight. He stood there, uncertain, his hands flexing at his sides like he didn't know what to do with them. You're sure you're all right? I'm fine. It's normal. Just strong. She smiled despite the discomfort. Here, give me your hand. What? Your hand. Come here. Elias hesitated. His hands were rough, scarred, built for fixing fences and carrying feed bags. Not for this. Not for something so delicate. But Maya was looking at him with those dark eyes, and he found himself moving forward, kneeling beside her chair. She took his hand, and God, it was enormous compared to hers, and placed it gently on the side of her belly. Her hands covered his, holding it there. Wait for it, she whispered. They stayed like that, frozen in the firelight. Elias could feel the warmth of her skin through the thin fabric of her shirt. Could feel his own heart hammering in his chest. Then it happened. A kick. Strong and insistent, pushing against his palm. Elias froze. His eyes went wide. Another kick. Then another. Like the baby was saying hello. I'm here. I'm real. Do you feel it? Maya asked softly. He couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. 7 years of carefully constructed walls, 7 years of deliberate isolation, 7 years of telling himself he was better off alone. All of it crumbled in the space of a heartbeat. There was a life in there. A whole person. Someone who would have thoughts and dreams and a future. Someone who kicked and fought and refused to be ignored. Someone who deserved better than to be called a mistake. Yeah, he managed, his voice rough. I feel it. He should have pulled his hand away. Should have retreated back to his safe distance. But he didn't. He kept his palm pressed to her belly, feeling kick after kick, and something in his chest that had been frozen for 7 years began very slowly to thaw. When he finally looked up, Maya was watching him with tears in her eyes. Thank you, she whispered, for saving us. Elias swallowed hard. Nodded. Carefully, reluctantly, he pulled his hand back and stood. You should get some rest, he said, his voice gruff again. But it was different now. Softer around the edges. Baby's going to need you strong. What about you? I'll keep the fire going. Make sure the pipes don't freeze. He turned toward the hallway, then paused. Maya? Yes. That man, Derek. He's a fool. Elias didn't look back. That baby's not a mistake. Don't ever let anyone tell you different. Then he was gone, his footsteps heavy on the old floorboards. Maya sat in the firelight, one hand on her belly, the other pressed to her mouth. The baby rolled and settled, content now. And for the first time since Derek had thrown her out, she thought maybe, just maybe, everything would be okay. The silence woke her. Maya opened her eyes to brilliant white light streaming through the curtains. The wind had stopped. The house was still. For a moment she just lay there, listening to the absence of sound. No howling, no rattling windows, no storm. The blizzard had passed. She pushed herself up carefully, one hand on her belly, and walked to the window. The world outside was transformed. Sunlight glinted off fresh snow so bright it hurt to look at. The sky was impossibly blue, cloudless, perfect. Icicles hung from the eaves like crystal daggers. It was beautiful. It meant the roads would be cleared soon. Maybe today. Tomorrow at the latest. It meant she had to leave. The thought hit her like a physical blow. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass and closed her eyes. 2 days. She'd been here 2 days, and somehow this drafty old house with its scarred, silent owner had become the safest place she'd known in months. But she couldn't stay. That wasn't how the world worked. Elias had saved her life, given her shelter, but that didn't mean he wanted her here permanently. He'd made his choice 7 years ago: isolation, solitude, peace. She was an interruption, a temporary obligation. She had to go before she became a burden he resented. Maya turned from the window and began folding the quilts, making the bed with careful precision. Her few belongings, the clothes she'd been wearing, her wallet, her dead phone, went into her small purse. It took less than 5 minutes to erase every trace of her presence from the room, as if she'd never been here at all. Elias stood in the kitchen, gripping the edge of the counter so hard his knuckles went white. He could hear her moving around upstairs. Could picture exactly what she was doing. Packing. Preparing to leave. Getting ready to walk back out into a world that had already chewed her up once. Ask her to stay. The thought came unbidden, urgent, terrifying. His chest felt tight. His pulse hammered in his ears. You have the room. The resources. She needs help. The baby needs... No. He couldn't. Couldn't let someone in again. Couldn't risk it. Caring led to loss, and loss led to the kind of pain that buried you alive. He built these walls for a reason. 7 years of careful, deliberate isolation. 7 years of safety. But last night, when he'd felt that baby kick against his palm, when he'd looked into Maya's eyes and seen hope there, real, fragile hope, something had shifted. The walls had cracked. And now he was terrified they'd crumble completely. Footsteps on the stairs. Maya appeared in the doorway, her small purse over her shoulder, wearing the green coat he'd given her. She looked small, vulnerable, determined to be brave. The road should be clear soon, she said quietly. I can probably get a ride into town. Figure things out from there. Elias said nothing. Just stood there like an idiot, words stuck in his throat. Thank you, Maya continued, her voice stronger now. For everything. For saving my life. For being kind when you didn't have to be. I'll never forget. The sound of an engine cut her off. Both of them froze. Out here, 30 miles from town, in the middle of nowhere, after a blizzard that had shut down half the state, the sound of a vehicle was wrong. Impossible. But it was getting louder. Elias moved to the window. A black luxury SUV was crawling up his long driveway, expensive wheels churning through the snow. Dark-tinted windows. Colorado plates. The kind of vehicle that cost more than most people made in a year. Who the hell? He started. Then he heard Maya's sharp intake of breath behind him. He turned. She'd gone pale as fresh snow, one hand pressed to her belly, the other gripping the doorframe like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Her eyes were wide with terror, the same terror he'd seen when she'd woken up in the guest room, when she'd thought she was in danger. Maya? It's him. Her voice was barely a whisper. Oh God, it's Derek. He found me. The SUV pulled to a stop in front of the house. The engine cut off. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the driver's door opened. A man stepped out, tall, lean, expensive haircut, designer winter coat that probably cost more than Elias's truck. He looked around with the expression of someone who'd stepped in something unpleasant. Disgusted. Entitled. Then the passenger door opened and a woman emerged. Older, fur-trimmed coat, diamond earrings catching the sunlight. She surveyed the ranch house with naked contempt. The man, Derek, looked toward the house. Even from this distance, Elias could see the cold calculation in his eyes. How did he find me? Maya's voice cracked. How did he know I was here? Elias felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. Something that felt a lot like rage. Stay here, he said quietly. Elias. Stay. Here. He looked at her and whatever she saw in his face made her step back. I'll handle this. He walked to the front door and stepped out onto the porch, letting the door close behind him. The cold air bit at his face but he barely felt it. Derek and his mother were halfway across the yard when they saw him. They stopped. The woman's eyes widened slightly at the sight of him, 6'3", scarred, radiating the kind of violence that came from having nothing left to lose. Derek recovered first, pasting on a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Good morning, he called out, smooth and confident. I'm looking for someone. A young woman, pregnant, might have come through here during the storm. Elias didn't answer. Just stood there, arms crossed, watching. The smile faltered slightly. Look, I don't want any trouble. She's confused, not thinking straight. I'm just here to bring her home where she belongs. She doesn't want to go with you, Elias said flatly. Derek's mask slipped. His eyes went cold. I'm sorry, who the hell are you? Behind the window, Maya watched, her heart hammering as the two men faced each other in the snow. And she realized with sudden, terrible clarity that everything was about to change. Derek's mother spoke first, her voice dripping with disdain as she took in the weathered ranch house, the scarred man on the porch. This is where she's been hiding? In this hovel? She turned to her son. Derek, handle this quickly. I'm freezing. Derek's jaw tightened. He clearly wasn't used to being dismissed, especially not by some ranch hand in the middle of nowhere. He stepped forward, straightening his designer coat, trying to reclaim his authority. Listen, friend. I appreciate you giving her shelter, but Maya is my responsibility. We had a misunderstanding. I'm here to make things right. His tone was smooth, rehearsed. The voice of a man who talked his way out of problems his whole life. She's not well. The pregnancy has made her emotional, irrational. I'm sure you understand. No, Elias said simply. Derek blinked. Excuse me? I said no. She's not going anywhere with you. The pleasant mask cracked. Derek's eyes narrowed and something ugly flickered across his face. Look, I don't know what sob story she told you, but she's carrying my child. That gives me rights. So either you bring her out here or I call the sheriff and... The sheriff is Tom Hendricks, Elias interrupted, his voice flat and cold. Known him 30 years. His daughter boards her horses here. You want to call him? Go ahead. Derek's face flushed. You think I won't? You think just because you live in this backwater shithole you can... Derek. His mother's hand on his arm. A warning. But Derek was past listening. The drive from Denver, the impassable roads, the humiliation of having to track down a waitress. It had all built up, and now it came pouring out. What did she tell you? He laughed bitterly. That I abandoned her? That I'm some monster? Let me guess, she played the victim, cried about how cruel I was. He took another step forward. She's a manipulative little... Elias moved. He came down the porch steps in 2 strides, and suddenly he was standing directly in front of Derek, and the size difference was staggering. Elias was 6'3" of muscle and scars and barely controlled violence. Derek was tall but soft. City soft. Never been in a real fight soft. Derek stumbled backward and Elias followed. Slow. Deliberate. Predatory. You need to choose your next words very carefully, Elias said quietly. His voice was calm, but there was something in it that made Derek's mother grab her son's arm and pull. Derek, get back in the car. Listen to your mother, Elias continued, his eyes locked on Derek's. Because if you disrespect that woman one more time, if you so much as speak her name again, I will make sure you regret ever driving up this mountain. Derek tried to rally, tried to find his confidence. You threatening me? You know who I am? My father owns half the commercial real estate in Denver. One phone call and I'll bury you in lawsuits. You think I care about lawsuits? Elias smiled, and it was not a pleasant thing. You want to talk about who owns what? I own this ranch. All 12,000 acres of it. I own the access road you drove in on. I own the water rights to the river that feeds this entire valley. He leaned in slightly. And right now you're trespassing. The color drained from Derek's face. She is not yours, Elias continued, his voice dropping even lower. She is under my protection. That baby is under my protection. And if you ever come near either of them again, if you even think about them, I will find you. Do you understand me? Derek opened his mouth, closed it. His eyes darted to his mother, who was already backing toward the SUV. This isn't over, Derek managed, but his voice shook. I have rights. I'll get lawyers. You'll leave. Elias didn't raise his voice. Didn't have to. Right now. Before I decide that scaring you isn't enough. For a long moment, Derek stood there, pride warring with self-preservation. Then his mother called from the SUV, Derek, now, and self-preservation won. He backed away, trying to salvage some dignity. This is insane. She's poisoned your mind against me. When she shows up at your door in a month looking for more handouts, don't say I didn't warn you. He turned and stalked back to the SUV. His mother was already inside, doors locked. The engine roared to life, and the vehicle began a clumsy 3-point turn in the snow. Elias stood in the yard, watching, making sure they actually left. The SUV churned back down the driveway, fishtailing slightly, and disappeared around the bend. Only then did he let out the breath he'd been holding. He turned back to the house and saw Maya through the window, her face pressed against the glass, eyes wide with shock. Their eyes met. And even through the window, even from 20 feet away, he saw something change in her expression. Saw the moment the adrenaline, the fear, the stress of the last 10 minutes caught up with her. She gasped. Her hand flew to her belly. Her eyes went wider. Elias was moving before he even registered what was happening, taking the porch steps 2 at a time, slamming through the front door. Maya stood in the hallway, one hand braced against the wall, the other cradling her belly. She looked down and Elias followed her gaze. Water pooled on the hardwood floor, soaking through the green wool coat, running down her legs. Elias. Her voice was thin, terrified. The baby. Oh God, it's coming. Right now. Her knees buckled. Elias caught her before she hit the floor, and his mind went blank with pure ice-cold panic. The hospital was 30 miles away. The roads were barely passable. And Maya was having her baby right here, right now in his hallway. Okay, he heard himself say, his voice steadier than he felt. Okay, I've got you. I've got you. But inside, one thought screamed louder than all the others. Please God, don't let me lose another one. Elias's mind raced through the options in the span of a heartbeat. Hospital, 30 miles on roads still treacherous with ice and snow. 20 minutes in good conditions. An hour or more right now, maybe longer if they got stuck. And Maya was already contracting, her face twisted with pain as another wave hit. Ambulance, same problem. They'd never make it in time. 911, he grabbed the phone mounted on the kitchen wall. Dead. The storm had taken out the lines. His cell phone was somewhere upstairs, but it barely got signal out here on good days, and Maya cried out, a sharp, involuntary sound that cut through his panic like a knife. There was no time. He was going to have to do this himself. All right, he said, forcing his voice to stay calm even as his heart hammered against his ribs. All right, Maya. We're doing this here. I need you to trust me. I can't, Elias, I can't. Her breathing was ragged, panicked. Yes, you can. He swept her up in his arms, cradling her against his chest. You walked through a blizzard 8 months pregnant. You survived, Derek. You can do this. He carried her to the guest room, laid her gently on the bed. Her face was pale, slick with sweat, eyes wide with fear and pain. Don't leave me, she gasped. I'm not going anywhere. He grabbed her hand, squeezed it once. But I need supplies. I'll be right back. 30 seconds. Count to 30. Can you do that? She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Elias ran. Kitchen. He filled the largest pot with water, slammed it on the stove, cranked the heat. Grabbed every clean towel he could find. His hands were shaking. When was the last time his hands had shaken? Afghanistan. The sound of the chaplain's voice on the phone. I'm sorry to inform you. No, not now. He shoved the memory down hard. Bathroom. He washed his hands with scalding water and soap, scrubbing like a surgeon. Found the first aid kit under the sink. Not enough, not nearly enough, but it would have to do. He was back in the bedroom in 45 seconds. Maya was curled on her side, breathing through clenched teeth. I'm here, he said, setting everything on the bedside table. I'm right here. The next hour was the longest of Elias's life. He'd seen combat. He'd seen men die. He'd pulled buddies out of burning vehicles and held pressure on wounds that wouldn't stop bleeding. But nothing, had prepared him for this. Maya labored with a strength he didn't know existed. Between contractions, she was soft, vulnerable, apologizing for screaming, for the mess, for being a burden. During contractions, she was pure determination, her hand crushing his as she bore down, fought, refused to give up. You're doing so good, Elias murmured, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth. So good, Maya. Keep breathing. Just like that. I can't, it hurts. I know it does. But you're almost there. He had no idea if that was true, but he said it anyway. You're the strongest person I've ever met. You hear me? The strongest. She sobbed, squeezed his hand harder. He let her. Didn't care if she broke every bone. Whatever she needed. The room smelled of sweat and fear and something primal, something ancient. The afternoon light slanted through the windows, turning everything golden. Outside, the world was silent, peaceful. Inside, a new life was fighting to exist. Elias, Maya's voice was ragged. Something's I need to push. I need to. Okay. His heart slammed into his throat. Okay. Do it. Push when you need to. She did. And Elias, who'd spent 7 years running from life, from connection, from anything that could hurt him, found himself on his knees at the end of the bed, catching a baby as it entered the world. The head came first, then the shoulders. He supported them with shaking hands, terrified he'd do something wrong, break something, hurt. Then the baby slipped free in a rush of fluid and blood, and Elias caught her. A little girl. For one horrible, frozen second she was silent. Whoa. Not moving. No. Please God, no. Elias cleared her mouth with his finger, turned her gently, rubbed her back the way some distant memory told him to, and she cried. The sound was thin, reedy, furious. The most beautiful sound he'd ever heard. The baby's color shifted from blue to pink as her lungs filled with air. Her tiny fists clenched, her face scrunched up in indignant rage at being forced from warmth into cold. Is she? Maya tried to push herself up. Is she okay? She's perfect. Elias's voice broke. He grabbed a clean towel, wrapped the baby carefully, cradling her impossibly small body against his chest. She's absolutely perfect. He carried her to Maya, placed the squirming, crying bundle in her mother's arms. Maya's face crumpled and she sobbed, relief and joy and exhaustion all at once. Hi, baby, she whispered, her fingers trembling as she touched her daughter's face. Hi, I'm your mama. I've got you. You're safe. The baby quieted as if she recognized the voice. Her eyes, dark and unfocused, blinked open. One tiny hand escaped the towel, fingers spreading. Elias sank into the chair beside the bed, his legs suddenly unable to hold him. His hands were covered in blood. He was shaking all over. And tears, he hadn't cried in 7 years, not since the funeral, were streaming down his scarred face. Maya looked up at him, the baby cradled against her chest, and smiled through her own tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for saving us. Both of us." Elias couldn't speak, could only nod. Outside, the sun began to set, painting the snow in shades of gold and pink. And in the quiet ranch house that had been silent for so long, a baby's soft coos filled the air. Life had returned. And Elias realized, with sudden and absolute certainty, that he would do anything, to protect it. 3 days after the birth, the house felt different. Warmer, fuller, alive. Sunlight streamed through windows that Elias had actually cleaned for the first time in years. The smell of coffee and fresh bread, Maya had insisted on baking, despite his protest that she should be resting, drifted through the rooms. And underneath it all, the soft sounds of a baby, tiny sighs, the rustle of blankets, the occasional whimper that never quite became a cry. Elias sat in the rocking chair by the fireplace, the baby cradled in his arms. She was so small. Barely 7 pounds, the old scale in the bathroom had said. She fit in his 2 hands with room to spare, and the sight of her tiny body against his scarred, work-roughened fingers still made his chest tight. "There you go," he murmured, rocking slowly. "That's it. Just close those eyes." The baby, Maya had named her Hope, and Elias thought it was the most perfect name he'd ever heard, fought sleep like it was her mortal enemy. Her little fists waved, her face scrunched up, her dark eyes trying so hard to stay open. "Stubborn," Elias said softly. "Just like your mama." He hummed something wordless, a tune he didn't even remember learning, and eventually Hope's eyes drifted shut. Her breathing evened out. Her fists unclenched, tiny fingers spreading like flower petals. Elias kept rocking, afraid to move, afraid to break the spell. This fierce, protective feeling in his chest, it terrified him. He'd sworn never to feel this again, never to care this much. Caring meant losing, and losing meant pain that could destroy you. But looking down at Hope's sleeping face, feeling the trust of this tiny creature who had no idea how broken he was, Elias couldn't bring himself to regret it. He didn't notice Maya in the doorway until she spoke. "You're a natural." Her voice was soft, warm. Elias looked up and found her watching him with an expression that made his heart skip. She wore one of his old flannel shirts, too big on her, sleeves rolled up, and her hair was loose around her shoulders. The exhaustion was still there in the shadows under her eyes, but there was something else too. Something that looked like peace. "She makes it easy," Elias said quietly, glancing back down at Hope. "Sleeps like an angel once she finally gives in." Maya crossed the room and sat on the arm of the chair, close enough that he could smell the lavender soap she'd found in the bathroom. Close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "You've been so good to us," she said. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you. You don't owe me anything." "I do though." She looked out the window at the snow-covered ranch, the mountains in the distance. "You saved our lives. Gave us shelter. Delivered my baby when—" Her voice caught. "Most people would have turned us away. But you didn't." Elias said nothing. Just kept rocking, kept holding Hope, kept trying to memorize this moment before it disappeared. "The roads are clear now," Maya continued, her voice carefully neutral. "I saw the plow go through yesterday. And I'm feeling stronger. The bleeding stopped. I can walk without getting dizzy." She took a breath. "I should probably think about leaving soon. I've imposed on your hospitality long enough." The words hit Elias like a physical blow. Leaving? Of course. He'd known this was coming, known it was inevitable. She had a whole life to build, a daughter to raise. She couldn't stay here forever in this isolated ranch with a damaged, scarred man who'd forgotten how to be human. But the thought of this house going silent again, of these rooms returning to their tomb-like stillness. "No." The word came out rougher than he intended. Maya blinked. "No." Elias carefully, gently, stood and carried Hope to the makeshift cradle he'd set up near the fireplace, an old wooden box he'd found in the barn, lined with the softest blankets he owned. He laid her down with the tenderness of someone handling glass, making sure she was warm, safe, settled. Then he turned to Maya. "Don't go." She stared at him, eyes wide. "Elias, I know I don't have the right to ask." He took a step toward her, then another. "I know you have every reason to want a fresh start somewhere else. But Maya," he stopped an arm's length away, his hands flexing at his sides. "This house was dead before you came. I was dead. Just going through the motions, waiting for time to run out. You were grieving. I was hiding." His voice was raw. "Hiding from everything. From life, from pain, from any chance of feeling something real again. And then you crashed into my barn in the middle of a blizzard and—" He ran a hand over his jaw, over the scars he usually forgot were there. "You woke me up. You and Hope. You saved me." Maya's eyes filled with tears. "You're the one who saved us. Maybe we saved each other." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. His hand found hers, and her fingers laced through his like they belonged there. "Stay, please. Not because you owe me. Not because you have nowhere else to go. But because—" He stopped. The words were there, right on the edge of his tongue, terrifying and true. "Because I love you," Maya whispered. Elias's breath caught. "What?" "I love you." She smiled through her tears, squeezed his hand. "I've been trying not to. Trying to tell myself it was just gratitude or circumstance or hormones. But it's not. It's love. Real, terrifying, impossible love." "Maya?" His voice broke. I'm broken. Scarred. I spent 7 years pushing the world away. I don't know if I remember how to." She reached up and pressed her fingers to his lips, silencing him. "You delivered my baby," she said softly. "You stood up to Derek. You rock her to sleep and hum lullabies when you think no one's listening. You're not broken, Elias. You're exactly what we need." He stared at her, this woman who'd stumbled into his life carrying hope in her belly, and felt the last of his walls crumble. "I love you," he said, and it felt like the first true thing he'd said in years. "Both of you. Stay. Make this house a home again. Let me," he swallowed hard. "Let me be there for you. For hope. Let me be part of your family." Maya's answer was to rise on her toes and kiss him. It was soft, tentative, perfect. Her lips were warm against his, and she tasted like coffee and hope and second chances. Elias's arms came around her carefully, holding her like she might break, like she was the most precious thing in the world. Because she was. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Maya rested her forehead against his chest. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, we'll stay. We're already home." By the fireplace, Hope made a soft cooing sound in her sleep. And Elias, for the first time in 7 years, smiled like he meant it. 1 year later. Spring came to the ranch like a promise kept. The snow had retreated to the highest peaks, leaving behind a valley transformed. Wildflowers dotted the meadows, purple lupins, yellow arrowleaf balsamroot, delicate white columbines. The aspens had leafed out in brilliant green, and the sound of the river, full with snowmelt, carried across the land like music. Elias stood on the newly painted porch, white, clean, welcoming, and surveyed the changes. The fences were mended and straightened. The barn had a new roof. The house itself seemed to stand taller, prouder, its windows gleaming in the afternoon sun. But the biggest change wasn't something you could see from the outside. Inside, the house was full of life. "Elias," Maya called from the kitchen. "Can you grab the cake from the fridge?" He smiled, something he did often now, and headed inside. The living room had been transformed with colorful streamers and balloons. A banner hung over the fireplace, "Happy First Birthday, Hope." Hope herself sat in her high chair, her face already smeared with frosting from the cupcake Maya had given her for practice. She saw Elias and squealed, throwing her arms up. "Dada." The word still hit him like lightning. Every single time. He scooped her up, frosting and all, and she grabbed his face with sticky hands. "Happy birthday, little one," he murmured, kissing her forehead. She giggled and buried her face in his neck, leaving frosting on his collar. He didn't care. The guests arrived in the early afternoon. Tom, the sheriff, with his wife and daughter. The McCrackens from the neighboring ranch. Sarah from town, the one friend of Maya's who'd apologized and meant it. Even old Doc Morrison, who checked on Hope monthly and declared her the healthiest baby he'd seen in 40 years of practice. The house rang with laughter and conversation. Children ran through the hallways that had been silent for so long. The kitchen smelled of food and celebration. Hope was passed from person to person, soaking up attention like a flower soaks up sun. Elias stood back and watched, his chest so full it almost hurt. This was what he'd lost 7 years ago. What he'd thought was gone forever. And somehow, impossibly, he'd found it again. Maya appeared at his side, slipping her hand into his. "You okay?" "More than okay." He squeezed her hand. "Thank you. For all of this." "For throwing a party?" She laughed. "For giving me a reason to have parties again." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and they stood like that, watching their daughter charm everyone in the room. As the sun began to set, painting the valley in gold and amber, the guests gathered in the garden behind the house. Elias had spent weeks preparing it, tilling the soil, planting flowers, building a small stone patio where a table now stood laden with cake and gifts. Elias raised his glass. "Just water, nothing fancy, but it didn't need to be." "I want to say something," he began, and the chatter died down. All eyes turned to him, and he felt the old nervousness creep in. Public speaking had never been his thing. But then he looked at Maya, standing beside him with Hope in her arms, and the words came easier. "A year ago I was alone. This ranch was just a place I was waiting to die." His voice was steady, honest. "I'd convinced myself that was enough. That I didn't deserve anything more." Maya's eyes were already glistening with tears. "And then, in the middle of the worst blizzard in 40 years, a woman stumbled into my barn. Pregnant, freezing, desperate." He smiled. "And she changed everything." Hope babbled something and reached for him. Maya shifted her so she could see. "Maya, you brought life back to this house. You brought light. You brought hope." He looked at his daughter. "In every sense of the word. You gave me a reason to fix the fences, paint the porch, open the curtains. You gave me a reason to live again. He set down his glass and reached into his pocket. The small velvet box felt impossibly heavy in his hand. Maya's breath caught as he sank to one knee in the garden, surrounded by friends, bathed in golden light. Maya, he said, opening the box to reveal a simple silver ring with a small diamond. I know we did things backwards. Baby first, everything else later. Soft laughter rippled through the crowd. But I want to do this right. Will you marry me? Will you let me be your husband and Hope's father in every way that matters? Tears streamed down Maya's face. She tried to speak, couldn't, just nodded frantically. I need to hear it, Elias said gently, a smile tugging at his scarred face. Yes, Maya managed, her voice thick with emotion. Yes, 1,000 times yes. He stood and slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled both her and Hope into his arms. The guests erupted in applause and cheers, but Elias barely heard them. All he heard was Hope's delighted laughter and Maya whispering, I love you, against his chest. All he felt was complete. As the evening deepened and the guests began to leave, Elias and Maya stood at the ranch gate, the same gate where Derek had arrived with threats, where Maya had first glimpsed salvation through the blizzard. Now it stood open, welcoming, surrounded by wildflowers. Hope dozed in Maya's arms, exhausted from her big day. Maya leaned against Elias, his arms secure around her shoulders, and they looked out at the valley together. Do you ever think about that night? Maya asked quietly. The blizzard? Every day. Do you regret it? Opening your door to a stranger? Elias turned and kissed the top of her head. Not for a single second. Above them, the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. And in the warm house behind them, the house that had once been a tomb but was now a home, the lights glowed soft and golden. A beacon. A promise. A place where love had found its way through the darkest storm. Narrator. Sometimes the worst storms bring us exactly what we need. Sometimes being lost is the first step to being found. And sometimes, when we least expect it, love arrives on our doorstep, frozen, desperate, and carrying the future in her arms. This is the story of Maya and Elias. Of a woman who refused to give up, and a man who learned to hope again. Of a baby named Hope who saved them both. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If this story touched your heart, please like the video and share it with someone you love. Don't forget to subscribe for more wood stories. Thank you for watching.